So it's with great pleasure I introduce our next speaker, Ms. Carol Amos. Mrs. Carol B. Amos is passionate about increasing Alzheimer's awareness, educating family caregivers, and finding a cure for this dreadful disease. She's a certified CARES dementia specialist and continuously updates her knowledge of the disease, research, and caregiving. She is the author of H.O.P.E, H-O-P-E for the Alzheimer's Journey, Help, Organization, Preparation, and Education for the Road Ahead. She shares her message of hope in the media and at churches, conferences, workplaces, senior living facilities, and community events. Mrs. Amos is a volunteer for the Alzheimer's Association as a Care and Support Committee member, Faith Outreach Representative, and Ambassador to U.S. Senator Christopher Coons. Her ultimate goal is to make hope for the Alzheimer's journey obsolete by supporting efforts to find a cure for Alzheimer's disease. Carol is a Cornell University graduate and retired after a 35-year engineering career with the DuPont Company. She is married to Alvin and is active in her church. She enjoys tennis, travel, and gardening at her home in Delaware. Mrs. Amos has attended several of our online events, and as we and I learned more about her and her excellent work, we really wanted to take this opportunity to have her join us and share more of her wisdom, experience, and expertise. So everyone, please welcome Mrs. Amos, who will be joining us on Zoom here in the Great Hall. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. I'm going to be sharing my screen. All right. So thank you, Robin and Joe, for this gracious invitation. Thank you to all of the family caregivers and professionals for taking time out of your busy schedule to come and find ways to be a better caregiver. I will share concepts and ideals you can begin using today for a less stressful, more rewarding journey. I'll also share passages from my book, Hope for the Alzheimer's Journey, and I'll gladly answer your questions at the end. My mother, Elizabeth Boyd, was a faithful Christian woman from humble beginnings. She began working as a domestic and retired as a school cafeteria aide. She was a deaconess in her church and had leadership roles at the local and national level of the National Baptist Deacons Convention. She was very industrious. She sold all of her clothes and was known for her Sunday outfits with the matching hat. She made ribbon corsages that our entire family sold on Mother's Day, and the proceeds went to our college fund. She took college courses in her 40s to prove that a college degree was attainable. She traveled extensively: Hawaii, Europe, Mexico, Sweden, and the Far East. My father passed away when Mom was 67, and she easily assumed all the household responsibilities. She was a very active woman in her church and community when Alzheimer's disease became evident in her 80s. Now, this is a picture of my mother on her last day of church in Cleveland. My mother lived alone in Cleveland, Ohio, when we began to notice memory changes. My oldest brother, Ron, was in Los Angeles. My brother, Mike, was in Cincinnati, Ohio, and I was here in Wilmington, Delaware. On her 83rd birthday in 2003, I sent an email to my brother stating how blessed we were to have Mom in our life, but I also listed some concerns. She seemed to struggle with completing basic tasks and often misunderstood information. We increased our calls and visits and spoke with relatives, family, and friends and neighbors. We compared notes, and my concerns were confirmed that she was having difficulty, and we began our journey with each other as our circle of support. We were able to get a good understanding of her health from organizing her doctor visit summaries. Her medical team had been monitoring her cognitive decline for years. We attended her doctor appointments and was told she has mild cognitive impairment, or MCI. We worked hard to honor Mom's wishes to remain in her home. We enlarged our circle of support with her doctors, sisters, close friends, and a social worker who visited every 2 weeks. When she was prescribed Aricept, we added a nurse to help manage her medications. We had regular contact and tried to simplify her routine daily activities. When Mom demonstrated that she could not live alone, we moved her to assisted living in Cleveland. A year later, in 2005, we moved her to memory care in Delaware, where she passed away in 2014 at the age of 94. When we decided to move my mother to Delaware, I was thrilled, but I wanted the argumentative, turn on you in a dime Mrs. Boyd to stay in Cleveland. And I wanted my fun-loving, caring vacation buddy mom to come to Delaware. But I had to accept that argumentative Mrs. Boyd and fun-loving mom were really the same person, and both were coming to Delaware. Here's a passage from my book, Hope for the Alzheimer's Journey. Caring for someone with Alzheimer's is difficult because the person's behavior is often different and uncharacteristic. My mother was previously optimistic, but the illness initially made her negative towards situations and persons close to her. Her judgment and behavior became unpredictable. On 2 consecutive days, the reaction to the same situation was completely different. She began to speak what she used to only think. For example, if someone walked by who looked different, defined however you like, I was afraid my mother may say something to embarrass the person or me. I remember when my father was dying of cancer, I kept telling myself this was not how I would remember him. I was there for my father in those last days, but in the back of my mind, I focused on the pleasant memories. I found myself using a similar technique with my mother when she moved to Delaware. I thought of my mother as she and her and mother, but not as mom or the mom, one of our affectionate names for her, or my mom. Realizing that slowly, in a way, I was distancing myself from my mother was crucial to reestablishing a more rewarding relationship. I could not keep her at arm's length. Throughout our lives, our mother supported my brothers and me 110%, and I wanted to do the same for her. I am so glad I embraced Mom and the Alzheimer's disease. I have so many precious memories from our time in Delaware I will treasure the rest of my life. I could not imagine her on the Alzheimer's journey without my 110% support. I had to find my mom that was hiding inside. I may not have liked her behavior, but she was still my mom. She may have said the wrong thing, but she was my mom. End of reading. Acceptance of my mom and her condition was critical to our rewarding journey. Although I accepted that she had Alzheimer's disease, I pushed her to be her best and to do her best on any given day. And this is a picture of my mom and I on my wedding day. Mom's move to memory care in Delaware was probably her final journey, and I wanted to make the most of it. But I wanted to avoid the arguments we had experienced the last few years. I started analyzing our caregiving interactions, and I developed a rudimentary form of what I now call the Caregiving Principle. And it states that the needs of the loved one minus the needs filled by the loved one equals the needs to be filled by the caregiver or caregivers. Simply put, your loved one has needs and will be able to meet some of their needs, especially in the early stage. But as the disease progresses and as they age, your loved one will be unable to fill as many of their needs. The unfilled needs defines the role of the caregiver or caregivers. Caregivers should do what the loved one can't or sometimes won't do. In my mother's situation, she initially needed our oversight, but then she needed more: a social worker, then a social worker and a nurse, then assisted living, and then memory care. Please note, although I developed the caregiving principle with a person living with Alzheimer's in mind, it can be applied to almost any caregiving situation. All right, let's look at the first. Okay, my slide is not. Okay. Let's look at the first component of the caregiving principle: the needs of the loved one. The physiological need. The basic needs are defined as the physiological need, which is similar to the clinical term activities of daily living. Activities of daily living include the need to transfer, toilet, bathe, dress, eat, and sleep. As a caregiver, your primary focus should be to ensure that these basic needs are met. If these needs are not met, this could impact their health, their attitude, and behavior. ADLs are used to determine if a person can take care of themselves to survive. As I analyzed our interactions with our mother, I realized she had more than just these basic needs. She wanted to do more than survive. She wanted to thrive. So I expanded the needs based on Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And many of you may have seen this pyramid. So the needs of my mother included the physiological need, the safety need, the social need, the esteem need, and self-actualization. My mother had all of these needs, and I had to think of her as a person who had all of these needs. When these additional needs were not met, it often impacted her attitude and behavior. I'll discuss each of these additional needs and share some personal examples. So yes, I just added 4 more items: safety, social, esteem, and self-actualization to your very long list of responsibilities. But these 4 items are minor in terms of workload, but can have a profound impact on your caregiving. Also, you are probably already doing many of them. The caregiving principle provides a framework to think about your loved one's needs. And really, the key is to think about these needs as you are making minute-by-minute and long-term decisions for your loved one. When we were deciding to move my mother to Delaware, we didn't have the caregiving principle, but we considered the impact the move would have on her interactions with family and friends. She would see my husband and I more. She would see Mike and his family less, and Ron about the same frequency. We assumed at least some of her siblings would visit once or twice, but she probably would never see her friends, church family, or other family members again. We had to weigh our mother living near one of her adult children versus remaining in Cleveland. We decided to move her to Delaware. And fortunately, the memory care staff, residents, family, my friends, and church family became her new family and friends. Please note, as a caregiver, you have to make decisions for your loved one. What helped me were my 2 brothers, my inner circle of support. We made decisions jointly and also solicited input from my mother, her siblings, and her close friends. You may be faced with decisions where there is no right or wrong answer. What works for someone else in their situation may not work for you in your situation. I call it a personal decision. Gather the facts, look at the pros and cons, and make a decision. Later, you may believe you made the wrong decision. Please don't beat yourself up. You're not a professional. you can't determine how some of these decisions will impact your loved one. When we moved our mother to assisted living, I felt it was the perfect move. But we soon found out how much the disease had impacted our mother's ability to function and thrive in assisted living. A year later, we moved her to memory care in Delaware. All right, let's move on to the safety need. Oh, come on, don't lock up on me, computer. I'm going to keep going and see if this will eventually catch up. So the safety need, your loved one's physical ability at home and away. So the safety need is divided into three sections: physical safety, financial safety and security, and what I call a sense of security. And my screen has just locked up. And like I said, I'm going to keep moving. Your loved one's physical safety at home and away. Your loved one has a need to feel safe from harm, but your loved one can do something that they believe is safe when it is not safe. Alzheimer's disease impacts more than memory, but their judgment, reasoning, attention, language, perception, and abstract thinking. Deficits in these areas can place your loved one, can place your loved one in harm's way. Implement safeguards to stop them from driving when appropriate. Implement safeguards to protect them from wandering. As the disease progresses, you may have to implement more safeguards. In addition, you are still protecting your loved one from COVID-19 with vaccinations, masks, and possibly restricting outings and who enters the home. My mother had a need for physical safety. For example, when I was driving, my mother would comment if she thought I was driving too fast or stop close to the car ahead. So I slowed down most of the time. My next reading comes from the chapter entitled, I Never Thought She Would. In my book, I include many of the emails my brothers and I sent to each other. And here's one from when my mother lived alone. It's from Mike, and the subject is entitled, Today's Incident, as in not yesterday's incident or last week's incident. Incidents were becoming the norm. The email goes, I received a call from the police tonight at a little past 9 p.m. Mom called the police because of the following incident. Supposedly, she was willingly picked up at home by 3 people she did not know and driven around. As they got to the bank, she refused to go in, but one of the males did go in. Mom reported she is missing a check she wrote to herself for $5,000, her black purse, and all of her identification. The officer called me while at Mom's. He is filling a police report and will check with the bank tomorrow. He said her checking records were not good, so he could not tell if a check was missing. I called Mom again after talking with Carol. Mom did find her purse and identification. I informed the police. I spoke to the officer who investigated the incident, and he said Mom had written on a sheet of paper, 2 young ladies have me in a snare. I think they have $5,000 of mine. This may be what Mom wrote prior to calling the police. Carol and I don't think this incident occurred. Sounds familiar? So the next steps. The officer will call the bank to check on transactions in the morning. Carol may have to call since she is on this account. Carol informed Mom's sister tonight. Mom's sister will visit Mom as part of her regular Wednesday visit. Mike will make an appointment with her new doctor within 2 weeks to see if she can be prescribed something to deal with these dreams or hallucinations. Carol will follow up with a pre-visit letter to the doctor. Mike will be there for a doctor's visit. Carol will inform the social worker of the situation for guidance. Carol to ask mom to check her purse to see if she can find the check. And we don't know if the police will contact a social services agency regarding this incident. So that's the end of the email, but the reading continues. The incident was not a delusion or a dream. It was all too real. Alzheimer's will result in uncharacteristic behavior. My brothers and I were grateful mom was not harmed. We were blessed. God had his arms of protection around her. We do not know what happened, and we never will. I never thought she would give away $5,000 of her hard-earned money to strangers, but she did. This was our defining moment, our enough is enough, or our wake-up call. We had worked hard during the last 2 years to help mom maintain her independence. Now we knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she could not live on her own. I was proud of how my brother Mike took charge when we discovered we needed to change mom's living situation. He conveyed 4 or 5 things he was planning to do, including taking mom to Cincinnati the next day. I asked, then what? And he replied in such a definitive way, I don't know. What he was doing was removing mom from a potentially dangerous situation so the family could focus on developing a plan. End of reading. This incident indicated we did not meet the safety need of our mother. This incident could have been the end of our journey. All right, the safety need also includes financial security. Financial security was a big need for my mother. My mother told her best friend she wanted Mike, not me, to handle her finances. So we reassured her this was happening. In memory care, mom set the table regularly for meals, and one new staff member thought she worked there. But more importantly, mom thought she worked there, and that is what paid her rent. So that helped satisfy her need for financial security. And then the third one is the third part of the safety need is a sense of security. The need for safety also encompasses what I call a sense of security. Your loved one has a need to be around familiar people and surroundings. You may notice that your loved one starts to follow or cling to you because you are a familiar person. One day, I was leaving my mother's memory care. I told her I was going to the mall. She said she wanted to go. I was surprised and happy that she had this interest. I got her ready to go out and we left. The minute the memory care door closed behind her, she decided she did not want to go. I knew memory care provided a sense of comfort for her. So I said things like, we won't be gone long. I only have one item to pick up, but she would not go. I could have been upset because I could have been on my way home, but I did not get upset. I knew her decision was not a rejection of me or my driving. At that moment in time, she needed the safety and security of memory care. So, how do we meet the safety need? For physical safety, review the routines and environment and identify and correct unsafe situations. There are pamphlets you can get, and on the screen is one from the Alzheimer's Association that can help you make the home safe. From a financial security, just don't discuss finances if you can avoid it. Use your loved one's money wisely. Get and apply for all benefits and discounts they are entitled to. On average, Alzheimer's caregivers spent $12,388 of their own money on their loved one in 2021. And expenses can add up with the cost of professional caregivers around $30 an hour. And I just saw something where in Minnesota it's $37 an hour. And with adult daycare being around $80 a day. And for the last one, sense of security. You may need to provide more preparation to make your loved one comfortable in unfamiliar settings. For example, try to think of what your loved one will experience from beginning to end. If you're going to a restaurant, try to sit away from other diners to minimize noise and confusion. For most doctor appointments, Mom took a low-dose anti-anxiety medication. The staff would verify that I wanted her to have it. And I would say jokingly, either she needs to take it or I need to take it, because taking Mom to doctor's appointments often caused a lot of stress for me. Let's move on now to the social need, the next slide. The social need is defined as the need for love and affection and belonging. And this is one area where you can solicit a wide variety of people to help. If you're not strongly concerned with COVID, you can ask their friends to take them to meetings, events, and activities that they used to participate in. Family and friends can send cards and family pictures. Many times I called my mother's siblings when I was with her so she could speak to them. My mother went on many memory care outings, including restaurants and a marvelous Christian play with live animals. And anytime friends and family were within 100 miles of Delaware, I got them together. Although others can help you meet the social need, make sure you periodically do something special with your loved one. Social outings are an opportunity to create memories. My mother loved to watch figure skating on television, so I took her to a program at the Wilmington Skating Club. She remembered this outing for a very long time, and I will cherish the memories for the rest of my life. Now, this is a picture of Mike with my mother at a family wedding we took her to in Maryland. So how can we meet the social need? Next slide. Human touch, hugs, kisses. Family and friends can call and visit. Attend select family events. And when you're going to these events, you don't have to arrive on time. You don't have to stay for the whole event. It's just giving them the experience and getting them out, giving them the opportunity. And I would just sort of judge how my mom is doing as to, when we would leave. If it looked like it was wearing her out, if she looked like she was bored, then, I would leave. If she was enjoying it, then we stayed. There's community activities like parades and festivals, just drives to see nature or holiday decorations, concerts, sporting events, and periodically give your loved one a gift. And this is a picture of my husband entertaining Mom on Thanksgiving. Now, one of the best gifts, and gifts don't have to be expensive, but one of the best gifts I got for my mom was this door decoration from the dollar store. And it's still going strong all these years later. She loved this scarecrow and it made her laugh. And sometimes she would put it on the back of the door when it was, out of season. Now, the music box was a much more expensive gift, and it required a mindset change for me. I was searching for a Mother's Day gift for my brothers and I. And when I saw it, I loved it. But I envisioned my mother winding it up too much and breaking it. But I thought, it's a gift, and she can do whatever she wants with it. If she breaks it, it won't be on purpose. She'll get some enjoyment out of it, and the case would probably remain intact. And guess what? She didn't break it. At my mother's Wilmington viewing, her caregiver told me while my mother was getting ready for bed, and especially in her final days, the caregiver would wind the music box and play. I am so glad I purchased this gift that my mom appreciated instead of getting a gift that I thought was more appropriate for Mrs. Boyd. Let's move on to the esteem need. Esteem is the desire for achievement, independence, status, dignity, or appreciation. Esteem is tied to how your loved one is treated by family, friends, care providers, and strangers. So you have to monitor these interactions. You also have to monitor your loved one. Don't let them call themselves stupid or dumb. They have a disease. My mother knew sometimes she wasn't quite herself. She called it having an off day. I thought that was cute, and I let her know it's okay to have an off day. Esteem was very important to my mother. When my mother lived alone and the doctors finally prescribed H.O.P.E, my brothers and I developed what we considered a well thought out plan, including a nurse to fill her pill box and monitor for side effects. We placed much of our hopes in H.O.P.E because then it was believed H.O.P.E slowed the progression of the disease by 6 months. Now the common belief is that it just helps with symptoms. But this email is from Mike, and it's entitled Slap in the Face. Mom called about 9:45 to say it was a slap in the face to have the nurse come to fill her pill box. She said she can do this herself, and when she can no longer do this, she will let us know. She said it was a waste of her time and money. I tried to argue she could get in a situation where she can't tell us, and we are not there to see if this is being done correctly. I told her taking all of her medications as prescribed is important for her health and to remain in her home. She caught me at a wrong time because I was hungry and tired, so I was pretty short with her. After some arguing, I said goodnight. See if you can get her to change her mind. I can't make her use the nurse. End of reading. Wow. Our plan was a severe blow to Mom's esteem. We focused on a successful start of H.O.P.E and did not consider the impact on her. She had no say in the matter, and she knew she was paying for the nurse. We spent much time and anguish dealing with this situation to ensure that the nurse and medication continued. In retrospect, we could have said the doctor was prescribing the drug and the nurse. And I heard Deb say, blame it on someone else. So we could have blamed it on the doctor. We could have said the nurse was only needed for the first month to verify she was taking the medication regularly. But at that time, we did not have the benefit of the caregiving principle. So this is a picture of Mom at her 90th birthday celebration in memory care. So how can you meet the esteem need? Always treat your loved one with dignity and respect. Next slide. Don't make them feel helpless. Let them make some decisions. For example, clothing, food, activities. Give them roles of respect, like saying the table blessing or serving their food first. Ask for their advice. Give your loved one an opportunity to contribute. Compliments and affirmations. All right, so the last need is self-actualization, and it's basically a desire for self-fulfillment, basically being all that you can be. And not everyone will have this need, but my mom did. Once I mentioned the caregiver helping her with the shower, and she said, I don't need help getting a shower. So meeting the self-actualization need. Let your loved one do as much as they can, as long as it's safe. It may take a little longer. If they are setting the table, the fork may be on the wrong side of the plate, but does that really matter? Let them try new things. Try appropriate puzzles and games. All right, so we just discussed the first component of the caregiving principle, the needs of the loved one. Think about some of the issues with your loved one and see if the caregiving principle provides more insight. As my mother declined, the relative importance of her needs changed. For instance, in later years, her need for that safety, that sense of security became really important to her. Memory care was very safe, familiar, and comfortable for her. She preferred celebrating holidays at her memory care instead of our home, so we celebrated with her at memory care. We reduced the frequency of some doctor appointments. She went on memory care outings less often. It was her choice, and I was glad she was still able to make decisions for herself. Mom was content. Understanding that my mother also had a need for safety, social, esteem, and self-actualization helped our interactions, and it helped to reduce my level of stress and frustration because I understood what my mother could not always express. So that's the first component of the caregiving principle. Let's move on to the second component of the caregiving principle, needs to be filled by the loved one. So the capability of a loved one to meet their needs is based on their cognitive capability and their physical ability. So maximizing the capability of the loved one reduces the caregiver's responsibilities. And when your loved one can take care of some of their needs, it builds their self-esteem. So as we look at the cognitive capability, it is important to get a proper diagnosis from a memory or dementia specialist and begin treatment if warranted. Please don't rely on a diagnosis from a primary care physician. I have heard of too many misdiagnoses. The PCP should be the first stop, but specialists will look at other causes of memory loss. They know that vitamin deficiencies, hormone imbalance, medication overload, depression, or even sleep apnea can contribute to memory loss. The specialist will do extensive blood tests, cognitive tests, a brain scan, and other tests. They may recommend other specialists. And as a caregiver, you just have to be patient. You are hoping they find a cause of the memory loss that is easily treated. But caregivers have to be advocates for their loved one. It took us 3 tries to get our mother on Alzheimer's medication. The doctor initially diagnosed her with mild cognitive impairment and wouldn't prescribe a medication until she formally met the requirements of having dementia. And as an advocate, do not be shy about asking questions. Do not be shy about getting a second opinion. And do not be shy about changing doctors if you feel that's necessary. All right. There are 3 things that I feel helped me to maximize the capability of my mother so that she could meet as many needs as possible. The first was maintain a routine. And this is a concept that was introduced by her geriatrician when she was having a hard time adjusting to assisted living. A routine supports your loved one's need for safety, that sense of security. Once my mother established a routine, we tried not to interrupt it. Even if we took her out to dinner, I kept the same dinner time hour as her memory care. The next is to minimize anxiety. Minimizing anxiety helps the person's need for a sense of security and their esteem. This helps them to focus on the task at hand. Sometimes when my mother was upset, not only would she not do what I knew she was capable of, she would sometimes make it more difficult for me to complete the task. Caregivers should learn some of the techniques to reduce anxiety, such as live in the patient's world and redirection. Initially, it was hard for me to not correct my mother, but it became easier. I also tried to redirect her thoughts. If it looked like she was trying to say something negative, I would quickly say something positive to try to set a positive tone. And the last thing is engage in stimulating activity. It may slow the mental decline, and it can also help meet the social and the self-actualization need by helping a person reach their full potential. So doing things like puzzles or playing Uno or bingo, and almost any activity can become a stimulating activity, like going to the doctor. Mom, the address we're looking for is 200 Oak Street. Let me know when you see it. And then in the lobby, let's use the directory to find your doctor. What room is she in? Now, where's the elevator? And then sometimes while waiting for the doctor, we read a magazine article together. So almost any activity can become a stimulating activity. Now let's look at the physical ability. Maintaining the physical ability of your loved one also helps them to continue to meet some of their needs. Work with their doctor to determine the appropriate vaccinations and screenings. My brothers and I always looked at the pros and cons of any treatment. For instance, we agreed to my mother's cataract and knee replacement surgeries because we felt they would be beneficial to her. Walking is a great source of exercise for the elderly, and exercise is good for the brain. Alzheimer's, bad knees, or bad hips can impact the gait of a loved one. When this happens, see if physical therapy or surgery will help. But keep in mind, it's not easy managing surgery for a person with Alzheimer's. And this is a picture of my brother Ron with mom when she was in rehabilitation after her knee surgery. All right. So let's look at the caregiving principle. I mentioned my mother's need for a sense of security increased as the disease progresses. So the needs of the loved one may change. The needs filled by the loved one will decrease because of Alzheimer's disease, aging, and other illnesses. Previous slide. This will automatically increase the responsibilities of the caregivers. So this last component will increase as the needs of the filled by the loved one decrease. Next slide. So as a caregiver, you have to pace yourself. Throughout our journey, there would be a crisis. My brothers and I would rally together to deal with the crisis, and then things would calm down for a while. Take advantage of the times when things are somewhat calm to cherish and enjoy your loved one. I had difficult days, but also days when God sent me what I call God's rays of hope. For example, I was sitting with my mother one day, and I decided to let her lead the conversation. She said, "I heard the wind blow." That was my father's favorite saying. I was surprised. Throughout my life, she rarely discussed my father. He passed away 8 years before I was born. Then she said, "It means I've been through tough times, but things are better now." This conversation was totally unexpected. Was she saying for her, things are better now? Her ability to recount her father's saying certainly implied it. I asked her siblings about the quote, and they didn't attribute it to their father. But I don't believe she could have made up the saying, especially with the intonation. My grandfather's saying is very appropriate for the ups and downs that caregivers have throughout their journey. There will be tough times and times when things are better or stable. This conversation with my mother was a beautiful ray of hope. Rays of hope help strengthen me for the remainder of my journey. Caregivers have to pace themselves through the ups and the downs so they can provide consistent care throughout the journey. Caregivers need to prepare for the increase in required care. The increase in care could be additional help from relatives, friends, using professional caregiving services, or moving the loved one to a residential facility. Starting the search early allows a more leisurely and a higher quality search. Tour adult daycare centers, memory care facilities, nursing homes, and talk with home health and hospice agencies. When we decided to move our mother to assisted living, Mike had already visited a facility 6 months prior, and he sent us all the information. This was a stressful time for us. We were remote caregivers. We had to transition mom to assisted living, empty her house of 20 years, sell her house, sell her car. So Mike identifying an assisted living facility in advance made a stressful time less stressful. Now, some caregivers are dealing with late-stage care, and this is when hospice can be a huge help. One article I read stated that families of persons living with dementia wait too long to add hospice to their circle of support. We did. We called hospice on Thursday and mom passed away on Sunday. Don't let the must be within 6 months of passing away deter you from calling hospice, because the 6 months can be extended. And I had one relative who twice was removed from hospice because she improved so much with the extra care. So hospice can be a big help. It can provide resources, physical help, tips on how to care for your loved one, and help you to understand what to expect. They can also help you to avoid late-stage hospitalizations that can cause extreme anxiety for your loved one. So as we conclude our discussion on needs felt by the loved one, it is important to get proper medical care for your loved one, to pace yourself, and to prepare for the increase in care for the next phase of your journey. All right, let's move on to the last component of the caregiving principle, the needs to be filled by the caregiver. The caregiving principle is a framework for the role of the caregivers. The role of the caregiver is to ensure that the needs of the loved one are met. But this doesn't mean that family caregivers have to do everything. Develop your circle of support. Engage other family members and professional caregivers. Develop a list of tasks friends and neighbors can help you with. One person cannot do it all, especially as the disease progresses. There are also a lot of indirect items, or what's called instrumental activities of daily living, that are needed to support the ADLs. And these are things like grocery shopping and laundry and cooking and ordering supplies, insurance claims, and medical bills. Find someone who can help with some of these. Mike took care of most of Mike's financial paperwork and responsibilities, so that really helped me a lot. So this is a picture of our family in front of Mom's Memory Care. Mike, my husband Alvin, me, my brother Ron, my sister-in-law Judy, Mike's wife, then the mom in the center, not looking at the camera, and my niece Mariah. So the needs of the caregivers are listed here. And so based on the caregiving principle, the priorities of the caregiver's role, number one is the ADLs, and then that physical safety. The next is all of the stuff you need to support the ADLs. And then, these new 4 items that I gave you, the safety, social esteem, and self-actualization, they're at the bottom of the list. They're not as important, but can have a profound effect on your interactions. But what's missing from this list? And there's a lot on this list to do. What's missing from this list? The needs of the caregiver are missing from this list. Next slide. Caregivers must make taking care of themselves a priority. My mother understood this in theory, but not always in practice. Each chapter in my book begins with a personal reflection, and this is the reflection for the chapter entitled, What About Me? In the fall, as dusk began to fall, my mother would rush me out of her room and tell me to go home. She said, I want you to arrive home safely because I'd be lost without you. I worried about being able to care for Mom. A car accident or a normal illness could have prevented me from providing care. Caregiving was a balancing act between my needs and my mother's. If I didn't take care of myself, I would be unable to care for her. End of reading. And then this picture is just me and my husband Alvin with Mom. So throughout this presentation, I have provided information and strategies to make the journey less stressful. But caring for a person with memory loss is extremely stressful. It takes a toll on every caregiver. Here are the symptoms of caregiving stress from the Alzheimer's Association. And I'll just read some of the descriptions. Denial about the disease, anger, social withdrawal, anxiety about facing another day, depression, exhaustion, sleeplessness, irritability, lack of concentration, health problems that begin to take their toll both mentally and physically. If you have any of these symptoms, it's time to regroup and to rethink your situation. As a first step, apply Maslow's hierarchy of needs to yourself. Are you meeting your need for sleep, hygiene, nutrition, safety, social, or esteem? How can you meet your needs? In most cases, you need more help. Speak with your doctor or someone you trust to help you work through your next steps. The Alzheimer's Association hotline is available 24/7 at 800-272-3900 with specialists and master's level care consultants to help you. So please add the helpline to your notes, and I'll repeat it. This is the Alzheimer's Association helpline, and the phone number is 800-272-3900. 800-272-3900. So throughout this journey, there will be times when you need to put your needs above the needs of your loved one. And here's an example. I took my mother to the doctor. The appointment ran long, and she also needed a non-routine blood test. For me, it was always easier to add on appointments while she was out instead of starting over the next day. When we arrived at the hospital, I grabbed a wheelchair so my mother wouldn't have to walk, and we proceeded to the lab. I had been told the lab stayed open until 5:30, but it had closed at 5. As I left the lab, a staff member came to my rescue and graciously agreed to have the blood test done by the emergency room. It took a while to process the paperwork, and my mother started repeating, "Why don't we just come back tomorrow? Carol, why don't we just come back tomorrow?" I knew she was tired and probably hungry, and it was beginning to impact her behavior. I knew this situation could spiral downhill quickly. I moved her to the waiting room, and I kept giving her reassuring signs. I forged on until the blood test was completed. Yes, we could have returned the next day, but I had missed returning to work that afternoon. Taking my mother out the next day would cause additional anxiety for both of us. But fortunately, even though some of her needs were not met, she did well. And I was able to get a good night's sleep knowing the blood test was off of my list. So how I took care of myself. From a physical standpoint, I remained current on my medical screenings and doctor appointments. I remained on my tennis team because I do better when I make commitments. And so that's how I got most of my exercise. For stress, I relied on my faith in God, attended worship, prayed, read the Bible, listened to gospel music. I tried to reduce stress in other parts of my life. For example, when I could, I would take the bus to work instead of driving to work. I tried to allow ample time for mom's doctor appointments because those were just in general stressful days because I would go to work and then pick her up, get her to the doctor, and then take her back and then get back to work. I took the scenic route home for mom's memory care. And this added 5 or 10 minutes to my day, but it just helped me to transition from my caregiver role. And I took vacations. So some of mom's holidays were celebrated days later with our family, but her memory care always had a wonderful holiday celebration with activities. And this is me on the tennis court. From an emotional standpoint, my brothers were always available by phone or email. The memory care staff and families of memory care residents were so supportive of me and each other. So that was a great support for me, as well as caregivers at my church and family and friends. And from a work standpoint, my manager was aware of and supportive of my caregiving situation. Throughout the years, I had built my vacation bank, and I started this when my father passed away, since my mother was living alone. So each year I carried over the maximum number of weeks allowed to the next year. And then I allotted 3 vacation days. I called them my sanity days. And these were just days I could do whatever I wanted. And most of the time I just took a half day. I'm sleeping in today. I'm getting my hair done today. I'm going to do a tennis lesson today. So this gave me like basically a half day every other month to just do something just for me. And this is a picture of my family with mom at church in the Delaware. So caregivers who take care of themselves are better caregivers. They are alert, able to think on their feet, more organized, resilient, more patient, and better able to handle the physical demands of the role. Caregivers need to develop their plan to take care of themselves. And here are some suggestions. Apply Maslow's hierarchy of needs to yourself. How can you meet your needs? And then my book, Hope for the Alzheimer's Journey. The acronym H is for help. Develop a robust circle of support. Don't be afraid to ask for help and accept whatever help that is offered. Organization. Organize all the medical, financial, legal, all the paperwork you get. I kept all of mom's information in a plastic rolling file tote. And, my brothers knew, when they came to visit, where everything was. And also on my website, I have some organization tools. But one of the most useful tools was what I called the Mom's Doctor Directory. And we used it to proactively plan doctor visits for her. So every quarter, on a Thursday and a Friday, we would sort of jam pack it with doctor appointments. And then my brother or brothers would come and take her to those doctor appointments. So that cut down on my responsibilities. They were doing the more routine appointments. I always had to do the emergency appointments because they weren't here. But it also gave them an opportunity to meet her doctors. So P, prepare in advance for the increase in care. Also prepare for any appointments you take them to. So for mom's first appointment with the University of Pennsylvania neurologist, I looked at the map and I said, I'm using valet parking. I'm not going to deal with getting her from the parking lot to the medical building. And E, education. Continue to learn about the disease. Join a support group to learn from other caregivers. Visit the Alzheimer's Association website and continue to sign up for wonderful conferences like this. Adopt a stress-reducing routine such as Kirtan Kriya. And this is a yoga meditation that you can do with your loved one. And it's been proven to improve the cognition of caregivers and their loved one. Make commitments, a tennis match, a hair appointment, vacation. Do something you enjoy at least once a month. And continue to be active in at least one of your groups, whether it's a social club or church or fraternity. So let's look at the caregiver's role again. What would it take for you to put your health and well-being above that of your loved one, maybe 5 or 10% of the time? What would it take for you to call on Monday to schedule your mammogram, your physical, your colonoscopy, or your prostate exam? What would it take for you to be able to take your best friend out to lunch for her birthday? Putting your needs above the needs of your loved one is hard. My hope is that this slide will be a reminder for you to ask yourself, what would it take? And then see if you can make it happen. As we conclude, the last component needs to be filled by the caregiver. Please take time to develop your plan in writing to take care of yourself. To summarize, I introduced the caregiving principle, which states the needs of the loved one minus the needs filled by the loved one equals the needs to be filled by the caregiver. And this is how you can make your journey less stressful and more rewarding. Accept that your loved one is living with a disease, develop and implement your plan to take care of yourself, get help to meet the total needs of your loved one, evaluate all of your loved one's needs when making short and long-term decisions. Prepare now for the next phase of care. Revisit some of the past issues with your loved one and see if the caregiving principle provides more insight. Maximize your loved one's capability by seeking proper medical care. Maximize your loved one's capability with routine, minimizing anxiety, and engaging in stimulating activity. And finally, pace yourself. So it's been a pleasure sharing my story and the caregiving principle with you. Please keep in touch. My website is carolbamos.com, where you'll find useful information, organization tools, and you can sign up for my newsletter. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And my award-winning book, Hope for the Alzheimer's Journey, introduces the caregiving principle. It's available in bookstores and has been reduced to $10 with free shipping on my website this month in honor of Alzheimer's and Brain Awareness Month. To conclude, as a caregiver, you have an awesome responsibility and opportunity. It's not easy, but day after day, you strive to do your best. So on behalf of your loved one, I thank you for all that you are doing. In the words of my mom, your loved one would be lost without you. Thank you for joining me, and please take care of yourself. Questions?
Thank you so much, Mrs. Amos. A reminder to everyone online that if you have questions, you can type them into the Q&A tab. For those who are here, you can write them on note cards, and our staff will walk around and collect them from you. And we have some questions to start out as well.
And I want to thank the person who advanced the slides for me. I mean, you do these things in case something goes wrong, and it worked out very well. Thank you so much.
And he jumped right into, we were all debating who needs to share the slides. So he did wonderful. So I have a first question for you from our online Q&A. The question is, would it be an effective method to embed your needs, so the needs of the caregiver, into your loved one's needs while still prioritizing their needs? So basically making a holistic care plan. And if that's a good recommendation, how would you recommend that someone develop that plan?
Well, I sort of, I've never had that question, but it sort of happened. Like when I would take mom, like I was very involved with our youth ministry. So when the youth ministry were doing things, like I took her with me to Sunday breakfast mission, where we were sorting food. It was something I was going to do, but then I took her with me. So it's, it sort of happened. We would go to the youth ministry, would go to a ball game. So I would take mom with me. So I think it's easy to do some of that. I haven't thought it through for all of them. But yeah, that's how you get your needs on that list. That's one good way of doing that. So I have to think about that a little more, but like I said, taking her to social events met my need for social. I took her to the skating. I told you I took her to see to the skating club, but a friend of mine was on the program, and her granddaughter was on the program, and they had a musician there who was the son of a friend of mine. So it met my social needs. So you can combine some of these.
Excellent, thank you. Another question is, how did you keep your family all on the same page? How did you handle it when you disagreed? I think respect was sort of like at that sort of basic level. Everyone's bringing something different, and we may come up with a
a better solution if we listen to each other. Like, they weren't necessarily in agreement with me moving mom to Delaware, because we could have kept her in Cleveland, but we still were going to be remote caregivers, and I remember one of the social workers saying early on, eventually you're going to have to move her to where you all are, one of these locations. And we would just talk it out. Sometimes it would be email. It was a lot of emails going back and forth. And I think if you look at who are we focused on, mom, I had a hard time with putting her in a memory care facility, a locked memory care facility, and none of us there to sort of get her out. And when we were talking about these memory care facilities, I mean, we use words like lock up and all of that kind of stuff, because, it is locked. And that was in the back of my mind. It's like, I can't leave her in Cleveland and she's locked in somewhere, So, we worked through it, we talked about it, and it was easy because when anything sort of happened, I was there. I was 30 minutes from her or less. So it's trying to say, what's our goal? And our goal is to make it better for her. See, I was able to, when we put her in assisted living, we're thinking, well, she can still go to church, her church. So it got to the point where she kept calling the lady who was going to pick her up for church. And it got to the point where it was just too much for the lady who was going to pick her, So she wasn't able to do these kind of things there. So bring her here. I can at least get her to church every Sunday. So it's a dialogue, and you're trying to come up with the best solution, but it's not easy. We were, for the most part, we were like hand in glove as we made decisions for our mother. But there were sometimes it's like, do we leave her there? Like my brother said, well, we had to move her out of assisted living because she kept going to check to make sure the doors were locked at night in the assisted living facility. And the staff was like, no one's down here. She could walk out and we won't even know it. And so then we had to get a caregiver to make sure she wouldn't leave. So, my one brother's like, well, we can keep paying for the caregiver until we really know what we want to do. I'm like, yeah, but you're paying all this money for a caregiver. Plus you're paying for assisted living. So, we just sort of had to work through that.
Wonderful. Another question is, did your mom ever struggle with confusion? And if yes, how did you deal with her in her moments of extreme confusion and delusion?
Yeah, just like, that incident, is this confusion or did this really happen? But yeah, I went to visit her in memory care one day and she's on the phone. And I'm like, who are you calling? She says, I have to find my children. I'm like, well, I'm one of your children, but no, I have to find where my children. So I think when my mother was raising us, I think she would, we didn't have like kinder care and those kind of places. So her children would be at different places. This week it was there, I'm not sure, but she didn't know where her children was that day. So we just sort of sat there and talked, and you just sort of talk about, well, but what child are you looking for? You're looking for Ronnie, or you looking, and you just sort of like try to continue to play it off and get the phone out of her hand. Cause I don't even know what number she would have been dialing. But she was trying to find her children. I mean, it happened a lot. And sometimes it was really, hard for me. And I would say to myself, I'm visiting her in memory care. And I would just say to myself, and I know people who have their loved one at home can't do this, but I would say, I only have to stay here for 15 minutes and I'm going to try to get her calmed down by then, And so in the back of my mind, it's like, I only have to do this for 15 minutes. And most of the time I would stay much longer than 15 minutes because, I could get her to a point where she had, sort of calmed down and was, sort of more stable. But that's sort of like how I did it. It's like, okay, if she's not okay in 15 minutes, I'm probably going to leave. I can focus on trying to get her where she needs to be these next 15 minutes.
Great. Another question is, if you're thinking about that support system outside of your immediate family, the first part is, how do you identify those other people who can help? And then what kinds of responsibilities or tasks are appropriate to ask them for help with?
See, working directly with a person with Alzheimer's is hard, and a lot of people, don't really want to do it, especially if they don't know the person. It's really hard. You really need to have some of the training and things like that. So I would say go after some of those instrumental activities of daily living. Can they do some meals for you? All of those things you have to do to support them. You know, my father goes to sleep, takes a nap at 2 o'clock. Can you come over here while he's napping? Yeah, he may wake up. If he wakes up, put this on the TV for him, those kind of things. Because it's hard doing those direct interactions with someone you really don't know. And it's hard for a person who wants to help to volunteer to do that. I mean, because you just don't know what the behavior is going to be like, from day to day. So when you're reaching out, I would almost say try to start with the instrumental activities of daily living, the shopping, the ordering this, and but you still need to get someone to get you away from the person. You need your time away, even if it's just an hour or two a day. You have to get away, and that's where the professional caregivers really can help, because they have the training. They've dealt with that. They'll tell you, I've seen this before, and they know what to do.
Great. Another question is asking if you've ever tried a memory cafe, and if you have, if you can share your experiences.
No, I have not tried a memory cafe. When we were dealing with this with my mother, they didn't have memory cafes back in 2003 and 4. They did have the adult daycare, but it was varied. Some were more medically situated. Some, I don't even know if most of them dealt with dementia back then. So I have no experience with memory cafes, but it's one of those things where don't make a commitment, but just try it. It could work out, and you could try one memory care and it doesn't sort of fit, but another memory cafe may, be better for your loved one. Because sometimes it depends on who's coming. And if people that are coming are, let's say, in the later stage of the disease, and your loved one is in the early stage of the disease, then it may make it more difficult for them. And then a lot of times with these memory cafes, it may not be the same people coming every time, or this person may only come on Mondays and this person comes on Friday. But you have to sort of just try a few of them out and see if it fits you. And you may want to go without your loved one the first time and just observe.
Fantastic. This next question asks about what you would recommend when the person with dementia has moved away from their home into a facility, memory care, or assisted living, but they still express a desire to go home. So this person asks if you had that experience with your mom, and if so, what did you tell her and how did you handle that?
It was a constant, probably probably for the first 6 years, we were sort of dealing with that. So the assisted living was almost in my mother's backyard. And so the day we were moving her, I had to catch a plane back, in the afternoon, but my brothers were going to be there to finish moving her in. So I was driving her to the assisted living facility. So I basically took the long way to get there, to make her think that it's much further away from her home than it is. And then when I got down to the street where I should have turned on, she said, well, you could have just come up this street. I'm like, oh no, but I was to call myself trying to, make her think it's miles away from her house. So I ended up, so we got her there and got her situated, but they were still moving stuff. They had a small truck, so they were moving things in back and forth. And they said they were back at the house putting, more stuff in the truck. And Mom came walking up the driveway. She basically had walked home. And it's like, oh no, this isn't what we need. We wanted her sort of like in the same area because she was familiar with it and things like that. But it in a way, it sort of backfired. So she was always trying to go home. I mean, it was a while before she realized she really even lived at the assisted living. She said, well, that's the place where I go to eat lunch, or it's just that constant reinforcement. And even when she moved to memory care in Delaware, I had to make sure there was no like suitcases in her room. She would get boxes out of the laundry room so she could pack her things to leave. Our phone bill was exorbitant. Her phone bill was exorbitant because she was calling airlines, train stations. She was just calling all these different places to figure out how to get back to Cleveland. But you just have to sort of work through it. You can't say, oh, I mean, and she would say like, are we leaving here tomorrow? Like, so sometimes she would think she was at a church convention. Sometimes I think she thought she used to go to these fresh air camps or something like that. So she would think this was sort of like a temporary place, I'm at a convention, and so when I would come in, she would say, are we leaving here tomorrow? And it's like, no, Mom, you live here. So that was one time when I wouldn't correct her, because if I said, oh yes, we're leaving here tomorrow, then she's going to start packing. So that was the, one time it's like, I have to correct her because she's going to keep doing something else. She's going to start packing up her clothes. So it's, I think maybe a year before she passed away, or maybe 2 years, that's when I think she sort of really felt that home was home, So it takes a while, she was in her own home for 20 years. So it takes them a while to adjust.
We have one more question, and then I think we'll turn it over to lunch. The last question describes the scenario where there's a caregiver who is so focused on their loved one that they're just not taking care of their own needs. They won't accept help. They won't take respite. What do you recommend that family members of that caregiver do to encourage them to take care of their own needs? Are there resources that can be provided to get this caregiver to take some time for themselves?
I haven't seen that, but like even with our mom, we basically had what we call an intervention to convince her to move to assisted living. We got, all three of us, their 3 children were there, 2 of her sisters, and we sat down and said, this is what needs to happen. So it was like an intervention. And that's what you may need to do with the caregiver. Get the people around her who love her. And my brother had like sort of a list, and these are our concerns, your safety, your health, and he just sort of like worked his way down the list saying, this is why, this is what's going on. And then he came up with the solution, which was to move to, assisted living. And fortunately, she agreed to go on the tour that afternoon. But you might have to do an intervention like that because this is not an easy job. And especially when you're by yourself and if you can't get away, you have to be able to get away to breathe. Their job is not care. They have a life. Caregiving is just part of it. And they need to be able to do other things. And so maybe it's the family coming in and doing specific things. You know, it's dinner time. Maybe it's the family bringing over dinner. You know, maybe you force yourself on the person. Maybe you kidnap her. Yeah, you just try different things. But I think the intervention, you know, if she can sort of see, you know, and you can ask questions. Well, when was the last time you visited your doctor? Are you current on your mammogram? Are you current on this? That would be my recommendation. Yeah, I mean, you can't force people to do it, but if you know, and it helps to give examples. You know, you're starting to have a hard time. You know, you had a hard time understanding. You know, when we were having this conversation, you really didn't remember that we had talked about A, B, C, and D. You know, so some live examples of her behavior that shows that, you know, things are bad. Use the list of the caregiver stress list that I had, and maybe put some examples underneath there of, you know, so this third one, you know, irritability, you know, you got irritable with your son, you know, so that could be a possibility. And also try calling that hotline and ask them that question as well. You know, what can we do? You know, that 24/7 hotline, it's always there for you. 3 o'clock in the morning, things are getting rough. You can give them, you know, they call it, no, they call it a helpline, but I say you can use it as a hotline if you need to. But, you know, 3 o'clock in the morning, somebody's going to answer the phone.
Okay. Everyone, please join me in thanking Carol Amos. Thank you for joining us today, Carol. It was wonderful. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Okay.